In May 1988, the night wind carried moisture from Lake Murray, blowing through the empty streets in the suburbs of Columbia, South Carolina. The neon lights from the bar faded behind as Caroline Mercer, 22 years old, started her silver Oldsmobile and disappeared into the rain. That was the last night anyone saw her alive. The next morning, Caroline's small apartment was intact: an unwashed coffee cup, an unmade bed, a clock stopped at 1:47 a.m. No one knew where she had gone. Only the vast lake to the west of the city lay silent, as if hiding something. The first search ended in despair, leaving a broken family and a bewildered community. The press called it the Lake Murray ghost, the disappearance that shook South Carolina at the end of the 80s. Police suspected an accident, but the faint tire tracks on the newly poured concrete road told a different story. Time passed, the case went cold. Caroline's name gradually faded from the files. Only her sister Maggie never stopped searching. 36 years later, when sonar technology and satellite data were used to rescan the lake, the calm water surface suddenly became a mirror, reflecting the darkest memories. A metal object lay deep in the mud, a secret buried with it, and a man who thought he had shed his past. This story is not just the journey to recover a girl's body, but a testament to the power of memory, human perseverance against time, and the truth. Because sometimes, what is buried deepest is the thing that never agrees to sleep quietly. Join me back to the summer of 1988, where a rainy night in South Carolina opened a nearly 4-decade journey for justice. Before diving deep into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love these forgotten quests for justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. On that May night in 1988, Columbia, South Carolina, was immersed in the heavy, humid heat after a light rain. The air in the city carried the smell of exhaust fumes, asphalt, and a hint of the sweet scent of magnolia flowers on the streets. In a small bar on Gervais Street, the flickering yellow lights reflected off a half-empty beer glass. Caroline Mercer, 22 years old, stood up and left the table, her face flushed with anger. She and her boyfriend, Dean Walker, had just argued, and their last words ended in suffocating silence. Dean sat back, his empty gaze following her through the fogged-up glass door as Caroline stepped out onto the street. She pulled her jean jacket tight, keys in hand, hurrying across the empty parking lot. Her silver Oldsmobile's headlights came on, casting white light on the drizzling rain. The engine purred softly, then the car turned off the main street, disappearing toward Lake Murray, the quiet suburbs where there were usually only the sounds of insects and wind over the lake surface. After midnight, that road was almost deserted. A few night shift store employees said they saw a silver car drive by, then vanish around the bend near the lakeside construction site. No one paid any more attention. The next morning, the Belk store opened at 8, but Caroline didn't show up for her shift. The manager called several times, only hearing the long rings echo into emptiness. By noon, Maggie Mercer, her sister, sensed something was off. She left work early, driving to her sister's small apartment in an old complex near downtown. The door was ajar, the inside quiet, only a faint whiff of perfume lingering in the air. The bed was unmade, her work uniform still hanging on the chair, the forgotten coffee cup on the table dried up. Maggie walked around the room, seeing everything intact, but no sign that Caroline had come home that night. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened the wall calendar, and saw her sister had marked today's morning shift with red pen, a habit she never missed. A cold premonition ran down her spine. Maggie stepped to the landline phone, dialing with trembling hands. When the dispatcher's voice came on, she tried to stay calm but couldn't hold back. "I need to report a missing person, my sister Caroline Mercer." As soon as Caroline Mercer's missing person report was received, the atmosphere at the Lexington County Sheriff's Department headquarters became urgent. The case of a young woman vanishing after a rainy night near Lake Murray reminded everyone of the accidents that had occurred around the deep waters and unfinished construction roads. Lieutenant Robert Hensley, in charge of the search team, immediately dispatched patrol officers, dividing them into groups to check the direction Caroline was believed to have left Columbia. The map spread on the table showed Lake Murray Dam Road cutting through the sparse suburban area, one side lined with dark pine trees, the other a steep embankment dropping straight to the lake. From that afternoon, patrol cars fanned out, while Maggie Mercer stayed behind to answer initial questioning. She recounted what she knew: the argument at the bar, the silver Oldsmobile, and that her sister hadn't taken any luggage. Police compiled a list of checkpoints within a 10-mile radius around the lake. That same afternoon, a witness at the Amoco gas station on Bush River Road was confirmed as the last person to see Caroline alive. The attendant clearly remembered a young woman, with long brown hair, stopping to buy gas and asking for directions to Lake Murray. He said she seemed confused but polite, and left before midnight. That statement directed the entire investigation toward the lake. As night fell, the headlights of rescue vehicles swept over muddy dirt roads, illuminating the crooked construction in progress signs swaying in the wind. On the second day of the operation, the rescue team mobilized search dogs and boats. Sirens, radios, and barking dogs echoed across the still lake surface. A dive team scanned the area near the main dam, but the murky water and muddy bottom made visibility nearly zero. Each time they surfaced, their eyes shook their heads in helplessness. Police noted that many locals around the lake also joined in, walking along the reed-lined shores looking for any debris washed up. They only found scraps of paper, soda cans, and faint tire tracks imprinted on the soft ground near the construction site, but the previous night's rain had erased most of the shapes. That evening, Maggie stood with her mother by the lake shore, watching the flashing lights of the rescue team through the thick fog. The smell of gasoline, mud, and water mixed into a stifling sensation. Everyone told each other it might be that Caroline lost control, the car plunged into the lake, that it was just an accident, but deep down Maggie knew her sister would never drive to the lake late at night, especially after drinking. She tried talking to investigator Hensley, insisting that Caroline had no reason to disappear. Hensley noted her statement, but his face remained cautious, no evidence yet to suggest crime or accident. On the third day, the search radius expanded to Irmo Landing and the service roads around the lake. The team used small boats to run along the water's edge, dropping hooked lines to drag the lake bottom. All efforts were in vain. The access road to the construction site was blocked by the contractor's iron fence, and getting permission to enter would take time. They had to mark that location on the map for later review. A few reporters from local TV stations showed up, filming police at work and interviewing Maggie. Her voice trembled on camera, saying that as long as her sister was safe, the family would forgive anything. By the end of the week, with no other leads, the search was temporarily scaled back. The state newspaper ran a small headline on page 2, "Young Woman Vanishes, Near Lake Murray." A photo of Caroline, light smile, long brown hair, and bright eyes, appeared under the cold caption, "Last seen Friday night." In the following days, locals around the lake still said they saw police continuing to patrol, but things gradually returned to normal. The remaining yellow ribbons around the lakeshore fluttered in the wind, like a reminder that somewhere in that deep black water, the answer might still be hidden. For the Mercer family, the lake's silence only made the fear grow. Caroline had truly vanished. As the search entered its second week with no results, the Mercer home became the center of phone calls, visits, and even the curiosity of those around. Maggie and her mother spent most of their time at the Lexington County Police Station, providing every possible detail about Caroline, from daily habits, friends, places she frequented, to the list of messages on the answering machine. Caroline was described as careful, punctual, and close to her family, a girl who rarely changed her routine suddenly. Investigators pored over photo albums, noting small details: the silver bracelet, the thin silver ring, the sneakers she often wore. Each item was listed as a clue that could aid identification if she had met with harm. But when all the information painted a picture of an ordinary life, with no signs of depression or disturbance, police began shifting attention to the last person with Caroline, Dean Walker. The first interrogation took place at the Columbia City Police Office. Dean, 25 years old, an intern engineer for a construction company on the Lake Murray project, showed up in a wrinkled shirt and haggard face. He claimed he had left the bar about 15 minutes before Caroline, saying she just needed some quiet time. However, bar staff stated they saw Dean stay after she left, drinking 2 more beers and leaving near midnight. That time frame matched the Amoco gas station witness, who encountered a girl matching the description driving toward Lake Murray around 11:45 p.m. When timelines were cross-checked, the contradiction between Dean's words and the witness became clear. Hensley, the lead investigator, noted in his report, need to verify Dean Walker's location between 11 o'clock, 12 a.m. Meanwhile, Maggie returned to her sister's apartment to gather a few items. In a desk drawer, she found an unsealed envelope with just Dean W. scrawled on it. Inside was a letter Caroline hadn't sent, the handwriting shaky and blurred by tears. The content spoke of hurt, discovering Dean's lies, and half-formed apologies. "I don't know how to trust you anymore. I'm tired of empty promises." Maggie turned the letter over to police, seeing it as a sign of serious conflict between them right before Caroline's disappearance. Police conducted a second interrogation of Dean. He admitted to the argument, but denied violence, saying Caroline left while he was paying the bill. When asked about work, he said he was with Santee Cooper Construction, overseeing road pouring materials near Lake Murray. This detail caught Hensley's attention. It was exactly the area the search team had been blocked from due to site security. However, there was no concrete evidence that Dean left the bar with Caroline or followed her afterward. Police couldn't obtain an arrest warrant based solely on conflicting statements. As the investigation continued, public opinion in Columbia began to buzz. Some believed Caroline had an accident and fell into the lake. Others suspected she left due to heartbreak. The press published her photo with headlines like "Mysterious Disappearance," alongside a slew of theories, from kidnapping to voluntary departure. The Mercer family tried to avoid reporters' lenses, quietly distributing flyers around the city. Maggie was exhausted, but held on to her belief that her sister couldn't just vanish like that. By month's end, police completed the preliminary report. They noted 3 points: the exact time of disappearance, undetermined; the construction area, inaccessible; and potential suspect, Dean Walker, with no evidence for charges. Hensley promised Maggie the investigation would continue, but his tone carried a hint of impasse. In internal files he noted, "This case lacks all physical elements. Everything is just voids." In the days that followed, rain fell heavier, Lake Murray's waters rose, dirt roads flooded, washing away the only remaining tire tracks. Each morning, Maggie passed the newsroom, seeing Caroline's photo still posted on the missing persons bulletin board. She paused for a moment, no longer knowing what to pray for: a phone call, news, or simply a small sign proving her sister was still somewhere in the world. But all she received was silence, a silence that made every theory hazy, and every belief gradually turned to suspicion. 1 week after the search had gradually cooled off, on Monday morning, the police received a call from Earl Thompson, a resident living near Irmo Landing, on Lake Murray. He said that while walking his dog along the water's edge, he spotted a piece of blue fabric tangled in the reeds and a small metal object glinting under the mud. The patrol team arrived quickly. The fabric turned out to be a ragged denim jacket sleeve, and the metal object was a silver star-shaped bracelet. Both were taken to the Lexington County Forensics Lab for examination. When Maggie Mercer was shown photos of the evidence, she recognized it immediately. That silver bracelet was the birthday gift from her mother to Caroline, engraved inside with the initials, CM. Even without results yet, she knew it belonged to her sister. 2 days later, the examination results confirmed Maggie's hunch. The fabric fibers and the silver bracelet both matched Caroline's belongings. The news spread quickly, and in a brief press conference, Lieutenant Robert Hensley announced, "The disappearance of Caroline Mercer has seen significant progress." From that point on, the case was officially investigated as one involving criminal elements. Search units were redeployed to the Irmo landing area, where the evidence had been found. On the second day of the new operation, the dive team conducted a sweep of the near-shore waters using grappling hooks and rubber boats. But Lake Murray's waters were murky after the early season rains, and the strong currents limited underwater visibility to just a few dozen centimeters. Each time they pulled up the net, it was only mud and rotten branches. On the lake's surface, buoys marking the perimeter bobbed in the fog, while below lay an inky darkness devoid of light. An old diver said, "If there's anything down there, the mud swallowed it whole by now." The police expanded the search on shore. They checked every dirt road leading to the lake, but the construction site area remained barricaded. Hensley contacted Santee Cooper Construction Management, but the response was simply unable to grant civilian access to the unfinished area. He noted the location, planning to return later. News of the first piece of evidence drew media attention. Major state newspapers ran photos of the silver bracelet gleaming in its plastic evidence bag. The headline, "Possible Break in Mercer Case," appeared in the morning news sections. Locals around the lake flocked to the scene, some bringing flowers, others just curious. Maggie and her mother stood behind the police barricade, gazing at the serene lake surface with hearts constricted. Hope flickered to life, but at the same time, they feared confronting the truth. On the third day, the search team continued scanning outward to the Hollow Creek area and the old Irmo landing dock. Sudden rain whipped the lake into waves, forcing a temporary halt. By afternoon, they'd only collected a few trash samples and meaningless metal scraps. The end-of-day report stated simply, "No vehicles or human remains found." In the Mercer home, the phone rang incessantly again. Neighbors, old classmates, even strangers wanted to check in, share condolences, or recount vague dreams. Maggie was exhausted, but still tried to answer each one, as if afraid one of those calls might bring some news. That evening, as the house fell silent, she took out her replica of the bracelet and put it on, the cold metal feeling like an omen. Over the weekend, Lieutenant Hensley held a brief press conference at the lake. He reported that the dive team had completed the sweep around Irmo Landing, but found no vehicle matching the size of Caroline's Oldsmobile. He avoided mentioning Dean Walker, stating only that all persons of interest have been interviewed. When a reporter asked if this could be a homicide, Hensley replied, "We can't rule out any possibilities at this time." The case shocked the entire community. Locals gossiped everywhere, some believing Caroline had met with an accident, others saying she'd run away. For the Mercer family, the lake's silence was what they couldn't bear. Every day, Maggie drove to the Irmo shore, sitting in her car watching the sunset ripple across the water. She knew her sister had loved this place, once saying, "Lake Murray always makes me feel at peace." But now, that peaceful scene only sent chills down her spine. The small bracelet had returned, but the girl who wore it still lay somewhere out of reach, swallowed by water, time, and an unsolved mystery. After nearly 2 weeks of searching with no new findings, Lieutenant Robert Hensley still couldn't close off the Lake Murray area. One morning, he received a call from Alan Pierce, a young engineer with Santee Cooper Construction, the firm building the lakeside retaining walls and roads. Alan said that while reviewing construction site records, he'd discovered a temporary concrete path poured last year to allow material trucks right to the water's edge. That section was never removed. "It leads straight down to the lake," Alan said, his voice dropping low. The statement immediately caught Hensley's attention. That afternoon, he arrived at the location Alan described with 2 officers. An iron gate bore a "No Trespassing, Santee Cooper Property" sign. After showing credentials, they were allowed into the abandoned lot. Weeds grew taller than head height, the ground edges scarred with truck tire tracks. Ahead, the gray concrete path stretched over 100 meters, leading straight to the still water. Its surface was cracked, one edge partially collapsed, exposing crushed stone and cement chunks. Hensley approached the water's edge and examined closely. The concrete base showed old skid marks, but they were too faint to identify. One officer dropped a depth buoy. The line tautened quickly, then vanished. The water there was over 40 feet deep. If a car had ever gone in, the mud would have buried it completely. Hensley ordered photos and preliminary measurements before heading back to headquarters. That afternoon, he contacted Santee Cooper representatives to request deeper access, but the response was curt. The area was part of an incomplete construction zone with collapse risks. Access not permitted without official orders. They advised working through the state energy department. That meant procedures would drag on for weeks. Hensley knew it could mean any traces being erased yet again. That evening, during a station meeting, he presented the new discovery. A few young officers were excited, but superiors just shrugged. No witnesses, no access, no evidence, nothing to act on. Still, Hensley marked the location on the map. He realized this path was less than a mile from Irmo Landing, where the evidence was found, in the same direction Caroline had driven on the night she vanished. 2 days later, Maggie read about the temporary concrete road in the local paper. The anonymous sourced article said police were considering the possibility that Caroline's car had plunged into the construction area. When she reached the part about Santee Cooper denying dive access, her blood ran cold. Instinct made her think of Dean Walker, the ex-boyfriend who'd worked on that very site. She brought the info to Hensley, handing him a copy of Dean's personnel file obtained from an acquaintance. Dean's name appeared clearly on the list of shift supervisors for the concrete pour on the night of May 4, 1988, the time of Caroline's disappearance. Hensley read it through and fell silent for a long moment. Though the detail was significant, it remained just an unproven piece. He reassured Maggie they'd verify further and await approval to inspect the site. She nodded, but her eyes held no full trust anymore. A week passed, the access request lost somewhere in state offices. Hensley returned to the site alone, standing on the old concrete road. Wind from the lake blew cold, rattling the construction halted sign. The water lay flat, with only faint ripples. He bent to pick up a cement shard, then dropped it. The fragment sank fast, leaving a small ring that vanished instantly. He knew this place held something, but rules and jurisdictional limits kept him from advancing. In his weekend report, Hensley wrote, "Temporary concrete road, direction toward Irmo Landing, deep water, suspected access from construction site, approval needed for survey." The report went out but received no reply. When he returned days later, the company had added steel barricades and new warning signs. The road was now visible only from afar, like a trail leading to a covered secret. From then on, Lake Murray fell quiet again. Those living nearby began treating Caroline's disappearance like an old sad tale. Maggie still called weekly for updates, and Hensley could only say they were awaiting permits. The clearest lead had become a dead end, not blocked by mud or water, but by locked administrative doors. And so the Caroline Mercer case slipped back into shadow, a path forward, but no way to take it. After the report on the concrete road stalled, the Lexington County Forensics Lab continued processing the remaining samples. Specialist Linda Carr and her tech team analyzed the mud and cement dust clinging to Caroline's bracelet and denim fabric scrap. Under the microscope, white particles mixed in the mud matched the structure of industrial cement used in retaining wall construction. When compared to samples from various Lake Murray areas, the results showed a perfect match to materials used by Santee Cooper Construction at the West Lake construction site. The very spot Lieutenant Robert Hensley had suspected led to the water. The forensics report concluded, Caroline's evidence likely had direct contact with the construction site area. The proof was slight, but the only piece still carrying the scent of wet cement. Hensley read the report, feeling things closing into a logical circle. Caroline drove away from the bar, possibly emotional, veered into the unfinished construction zone, then slid into the lake. He immediately submitted a proposal to expand searches there, but the file got stuck in regulations on land ownership and worker safety. Without official orders, he couldn't send anyone in. While authorities debated, the press began exploiting the exam results. Headlines kept coming. Construction cement matches mud sample in Mercer case, accident or crime. Public opinion split. Some believed Caroline had accidentally fallen into the lake. Others brought up Dean Walker, the ex who'd been an engineer on that exact project. Maggie read every article, her heart in turmoil. She didn't want to believe it was an accident, but the more she thought, the more everything seemed too coincidental for mere chance. Hensley called a small meeting. He laid out 3 possibilities: accident, suicide, or third-party involvement. But when department heads reviewed, they only allowed the first hypothesis in the official file. No car, no body, just dirt and speculation, one superior said. It felt like a verdict on the team's efforts. The case shifted to an undetermined motor vehicle accident. Hensley objected but got no approval. He knew if the car truly lay under the water near the site, it could stay buried forever under meters of mud. Days later, when he returned, Santee Cooper had bulldozers working, dumping new layers of dirt and stone. The temporary road was completely covered, as if it had never existed. He stood watching the lake's sunset glow, helplessness weighing heavier than ever. In his final report, Hensley wrote, "Evidence samples match construction materials from Santee Cooper site. High likelihood victim met with accident and fell into deep water area nearby. Further verification impossible due to lack of vehicle and access." The record was filed, marking the Caroline Mercer case temporarily closed. When police arrived to inform the family of the conclusion, Maggie sat still, listening to every word, hands clenched on her knees. They said all traces pointed to Caroline having an accident, possibly losing control or skidding on a wet road. They advised the family to prepare for the worst. But Maggie didn't believe it. Her sister feared water and was a careful driver. She pressed for more on criminal possibilities, but the answer remained no evidence. Media coverage tapered off. The story reduced to a small column on page 3, Mercer disappearance, likely accident. Dean Walker also left Columbia, moving to Georgia for work. No one mentioned him anymore. Everything faded, like the car never found. By late summer that year, Lake Murray lay utterly still. Barricades around the construction site were removed, fresh asphalt covering the old concrete. In police files, Caroline Mercer's case was marked no criminal indicators. Hensley filed the thick dossier in storage, pen stopping at the last line, body and vehicle not located. At the same time, Maggie drove alone to Irmo Landing, where the silver bracelet had been recovered. She stood silent, wind whipping her hair, gazing at the flat water as if nothing had ever happened. For her the case wasn't closed, it was just sunk, deep under that murky surface, where time and silence had conspired to hide the answers. 2 years after Caroline Mercer's disappearance, the case file still lay dormant in the Lexington County Sheriff's Department archives, less than 20 pages thick. No new witnesses, no additional evidence, and no vehicle recovered. Lieutenant Robert Hensley occasionally reread his notes, but every effort stalled at the same point. The temporary concrete road at the Santee Cooper construction site was now buried under fresh asphalt, with no trace left. By 1990, after completing the administrative procedures, Caroline's disappearance was officially classified as cold case, unsolved. When the notification was sent, the Mercer family received nothing more than a confirmation letter. Maggie held that paper in her hands, unsure whether to cry or to rage. Her mother, since hearing the case was closed, hardly left the house. The photo of Caroline in her white dress, her bright smile on graduation day, sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by candles and dried flowers. On each of Caroline's birthdays, They took flowers to Lake Murray, letting the petals drift on the water like a sad ritual that had become routine. Dean Walker left South Carolina right after the project wrapped up. He moved to Augusta, Georgia, citing work reasons, and cut ties with most of his old friends. The police couldn't follow up further, since he was no longer an official suspect. In Hensley's final notes, he wrote, "No basis to reopen interrogation." The words were concise, but they weighed heavily on him. He had once believed he would uncover something, but now everything was sunk beneath layers of mud and time. By mid-1991, Santee Cooper had completed the entire lake embankment project. The new asphalt road, rows of young trees replanted, the construction site that had once raised so many suspicions, now transformed into a peaceful residential area. No one remembered anymore that this had once been the place where a young woman was believed to have driven off into the rainy night. Maggie still lived in the city, working as a secretary for an insurance company. Every morning, she passed by the offices of the state, where Caroline's missing person photo had been posted for months. Now that spot held other notices, and no one mentioned the Mercer name anymore. But every Sunday evening, she still went to the lake, standing at Irmo Landing, where the silver bracelet had once been dredged up, to watch the lights reflecting on the water. She always carried a small replica of that bracelet, holding it in her palm until her fingers went numb from the cold. As for Hensley, after the case was closed, he was transferred to another department. He had once tried submitting a proposal to reopen the investigation upon hearing that a group of fishermen had discovered a metal object at the lake bottom, but the examination results revealed only an old oil drum. He gradually learned to accept that some cases would never be solved. Time passed, and everything gradually faded away. Lake Murray continued expanding its shoreline communities. Children swam, sailboats glided across the water. No one remembered anymore that this place had once been the center of a disappearance. The Mercer family still kept their annual memorial habit, though fewer people came each year. Caroline's mother grew frailer, while Maggie quietly placed flowers on the water, watching the petals drift farther away. In the fall of 1993, Hensley wrote his final letter to Maggie. He apologized for not being able to give the family answers, then ended with a short line, "I believe your sister is still at Lake Murray." Maggie folded the letter and tucked it into her mother's Bible. From then on, the Caroline Mercer case existed only in the memories of a few, like a fading scar in local history. In the years that followed, the press no longer mentioned the case. The file in the police department's cold storage gathered thick dust, marking a story without an ending. Outside, Lake Murray remained serene, reflecting the summer blue sky. The story of the young woman who vanished in 1988 became something people only vaguely remembered, a name, a photo, and whispers that some secrets would forever lie beneath the deep water. 36 years after Caroline Mercer's disappearance, Lake Murray was a different place. The old construction site, once suspected of having a road leading into the water, was now called Somerset Estates, a peaceful neighborhood with manicured lawns and rows of blazing red maples. But every time she looked at the lake's still surface, Maggie Mercer, now 59 years old, still felt like she was gazing into a secret that had never been properly buried. She lived alone in her mother's old house, surrounded by walls covered in photos of her sister, Caroline, forever frozen at age 22. Early in 2024, during a late-night TV viewing, Maggie saw a program about the civilian dive team Tidewater Recovery, famous for cracking cold cases using sonar technology. They had just helped locate a missing person after 27 years in Florida. That story awakened a hope that had slumbered in her for nearly 4 decades. The very next day, Maggie emailed the team, briefly recounting Caroline's case and attaching old newspaper clippings. 3 days later, she received a reply from Ronald Keyes, an investigator collaborating with SLED South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. He wrote, "We have reviewed your family's case. It may be re-evaluated with current technology." For the first time in over 30 years, Maggie felt her heart pounding again. A week later, the Tidewater team arrived in Columbia, 3 men carrying portable sonar equipment, topographic maps, and specialized computers. Maggie welcomed them at her home, spreading all the old documents on the table: photos of the silver bracelet, forensic reports, maps of the 1988 Santee Cooper construction site. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged, but Keyes read it all carefully. He paused at the old map and said, "This, the temporary road, is now within Somerset Estates. If there's anything down there, it's still intact." They reviewed current satellite images together. The lake area around Somerset retained its original shape, just with added boat docks and new concrete embankments. According to geological data, the water level hadn't changed significantly since 1988. A diver named Evan Brooks remarked, "If her car went in, it's still sitting quietly under that mud." The thought made Maggie choke up. Keyes contacted SLED, requesting official collaboration to reopen the file. On April 12, 2024, the Caroline Mercer case was re-registered under cold case hash 1988024. In a meeting in Columbia, the parties agreed to survey the entire Lake Murray area, using next-generation side-scan sonar, combined with high-resolution satellite imagery, to compare topography between 1988 and 2024. The sole objective: find the silver Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, the vehicle that vanished with Caroline. A week later, the team reached Lake Murray. The new boat dock was near the exact spot where Hensley had stopped 36 years earlier. Evan prepared the sonar equipment, lowering it into the water. On the screen, response waves from the lake bottom gradually appeared, bright lines, dark patches. Everyone watched in silence. The water surface was calm, broken only by the steady hum of the small motor. After 2 hours, the initial data revealed an unusual depression on the lake bottom, about 30 feet wide, deeper than the surrounding area. Evan marked the coordinates and said quietly, "Could be something big, or just a geological sinkhole." To confirm, they decided to cross-reference with old satellite images. Keyes sent a request to the U.S. Geological Survey for extracts from 1988, 1992, and 2020. When the data loaded, the whole team pored over the comparisons. They discovered that the depression had appeared right after 1988, the time of Caroline's disappearance, and remained unchanged for 3 decades. Maggie stared at the images, her heart racing. She stood silently by the window, listening to Keyes on the radio. "This location matches exactly with Caroline's last known direction of travel. If there's a car down there, we'll see it." Those words choked her up. 36 years, and no one had said Caroline with such certainty before. The next day, the team continued the survey. They set up a small command post by the lake, planting flags to mark the suspect area. Curious locals asked questions, but Keyes only said it was a geological survey. When the sonar equipment ran again, the feedback images sharpened amid the thick mud. A curved metal outline emerged, possibly a car frame. Evan zoomed in on the image, his voice lowering. "If it's real, we're looking at a submerged vehicle." Maggie stood behind, not daring to blink. The afternoon lake sparkled in the sunlight, while on the screen was the hazy shape of what she had searched for half her life. Emotion surged. She gripped the railing to steady herself. Keyes placed a hand on her shoulder, saying softly, "We'll verify further, but I think that girl is about to come home." As the sun set, the team packed up the equipment. Maggie gazed at the lake bathed in gold, her heart swelling with a mix of fear and hope. 36 years gone, and finally, someone was listening, returning to where it all began. She knew that from tomorrow, Lake Murray's surface would no longer be peaceful, because beneath that water, a truth buried for over half a lifetime might be waiting. 2 days after the first survey, satellite imagery data from the U.S. Geological Survey arrived at investigator Ronald Keyes. The entire Tidewater recovery team gathered at the temporary command room on the shore of Lake Murray, where photos from 1988 to 2024 were displayed on a large screen. At first it was just blurry gray patches, but when Evan Brooks, the sonar technician, zoomed in on the western lake area, a detail made everyone freeze. A narrow concrete road leading straight into the water, clearly visible in the April 1988 image, just weeks before Caroline Mercer's disappearance. Evan pointed at the screen. This is exactly the temporary road Santee Cooper poured for material trucks. It juts straight into the lake, and ends right at the area our sonar just picked up metal reflections. Keyes nodded, his eyes thoughtful. In the 1990 satellite image, the road was half submerged by 2000, it had vanished completely under the water, leaving only a faint bright scar. If Caroline went in here, the car could have been down there for 36 years untouched, he said. Maggie sat still, her hands clenched tight. She couldn't tear her eyes from the image of the road sinking into the lake, knowing she was looking at the place where her sister vanished. When Keyes pulled up Santee Cooper's 1988 personnel records, the name Dean Walker appeared clearly. Construction site supervisor, night shift 5/3, May 5, 1988. The room fell deathly silent. Maggie whispered, "He was there, that very night." Keyes nodded slightly, and no one ever went back to check. That afternoon, the team drove to Somerset Estates, now a high-end neighborhood built on the old construction site foundation. Standing on the lakeside lawn, Keyes pointed southwest. "Right down there, that's the temporary road." A light breeze rustled the trees, the water surface flat and calm, nothing evoking the past. An elderly resident recounted that when they built the neighborhood in 2005, workers had uncovered a concrete foundation underground, but thought it was an old boat dock, and paid it no mind. Keyes noted the statement, his eyes lighting up. "So the concrete base is still intact below." That evening, the team returned to the boat dock, overlaying the 1988 imagery with the sonar map. When the two layers aligned, the concrete road emerged like a spine, ending precisely at the sonar's strongest metal reflection point. Evan said quietly, "If there's a car, it's here." Maggie went still, a mix of hope and fear washing over her. The next morning, Keyes sent an official request to Dominion Energy, the current manager of the Dominion Reservoir site area, seeking access for sonar and drone surveys. In the document, he laid out all the evidence, from satellite images and topographic data to construction history, emphasizing the high likelihood that this was where Caroline's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme had sunk. At the same time, SLED confirmed legal support, classifying the case as a cold case with criminal suspicions. While awaiting a response, the team continued lake geology research. Evan realized that in the late 80s, Lake Murray's water level was about 4.5 feet lower than today due to dam regulation. That meant, in the year of Caroline's disappearance, the concrete road was still clearly visible, easily misleading a stranger into thinking they could drive right to the lake's edge. After the neighborhood was built, the water rose to cover it completely. If the car went in, Evan said, it's buried under at least 40 feet of water, and nearly 10 feet of mud. The sonar still picks it up because of the large metal frame, right size for an 80s car. Maggie listened quietly, her mind flashing back to the rainy night in 1988. The silver car driving through wet dirt roads, headlights reflecting on the water. Maybe Caroline had just wanted to drive to clear her head, then wandered into the unmarked construction site. A wheel slip, and the car plunged into the lake in silence. The thought chilled her, but at least now, the truth was emerging. 3 days later, Dominion Energy responded. They had received Keyes's proposal, and would forward it to the South Carolina Dam and Reservoir Safety Commission for review. We understand the importance of this case, the company representative wrote, and will cooperate within allowable limits. That news made Maggie burst into tears, not from joy, but because after 36 years, No one was refusing to mention Caroline's name anymore. While waiting for permits, the team used a drone to film the area. In the early morning sunlight, the lens swept over the water, capturing a faint silver glimmer, small but distinct. Evan zoomed in on the frame, spotting a curved outline weakly reflecting beneath the murky brown water. "Could be natural glare," he said, but his voice was full of excitement. That evening, they compiled all the sonar, drone, and satellite data onto a single map. A concrete road ran straight from Somerset into the lake, ending at the strongest reflection point. Keyes said slowly, "Everything lines up. This is where the car went in." No one spoke further. Maggie stood behind, her eyes blurred with tears as she stared at the small silver dot amid the black water on the screen. "If that's my sister," she whispered, "bring her home." Keyes nodded, his voice firm. "We will, by any means." He knew they had come too far to stop. The road sunk in the lake was no longer a mystery. It was a reminder from the past, slowly surfacing through each piece of data. And in the heart of Lake Murray, perhaps the truth lay there, waiting to be brought into the light, along with the answers a family had waited for nearly 40 years. 3 days after submitting the application, the Tidewater Recovery Team received an official response letter from Dominion Energy. Though the wording was mild, the content was filled with rejection. The company cannot approve underwater exploration in the area under Dominion's ownership and management of the reservoir site, due to concerns regarding dam safety, infrastructure protection, and property rights. The letter, signed by Dominion Energy's legal department, ended with an emphatic line: "Any surveying activity without permission will be considered trespassing." The entire team sat silently in the command room. On the table, the map of Lake Murray remained open, with a red dot marking the suspected location. Maggie sat in the corner, clutching a small silver bracelet tightly, listening quietly as Keyes read each sentence. When he folded the document, no one spoke for several minutes. Finally, Evan Brooks let out a sigh. "They're protecting a secret, or just don't want to get involved." Keyes shook his head. "They're protecting themselves, but we're not done yet. There's another legal avenue." The very next day, Keyes went to SLED headquarters in Columbia to present the situation. He proposed applying for a limited search warrant, a special search order allowing the use of sonar to scan underwater in a narrow scope, without touching infrastructure or altering the lakebed. This warrant was only issued in cold cases with specific evidence, and required proof that the survey area was highly likely to contain physical evidence. Preparing the application took several weeks. They had to attach all the evidence: satellite photos, sonar data, topographic maps, Dean Walker's personnel records, and the Tidewater team's technical reports. The waiting days dragged on heavily. Maggie stayed in Columbia to assist the team, arriving at headquarters each morning with Keyes, bringing coffee for the whole crew before sitting for hours in the hallway. She wasn't used to the cumbersome administrative procedures, but she understood this was the final step to reaching the truth. "I've waited 36 years, she said. "A few more weeks won't matter, as long as they finally look under the lake." As time passed, the press began to sniff out the scent of a big story. A local newspaper ran an article: 1988 cold case reopened. New evidence linked to Lake Murray. Right after, Dominion Energy issued a statement denying obstructing the investigation, claiming they were merely complying with national safety regulations. Things got noisy. Some residents around Somerset Estates grew uneasy, worried that the survey might affect water levels or damage property. Police had to hold a community meeting to reassure them: if there's any sonar scanning, it will be safe and limited to a small area. While the public buzzed, Keyes patiently pursued the process. He spent hours on the phone with the Lexington County Courthouse, then visited the South Carolina Attorney General's office to detail the sonar's technical aspects. A court clerk asked, "Are you sure it won't cause any harm to the dam?" Keyes replied, "We just want to find a car, and possibly a person." That statement silenced the room. At the end of June 2024, the news finally arrived. Judge Harold Layton signed off on the limited search warrant for the SLED Cold Case Division. The permit was a concise 2 pages, stating clearly, authorizes the investigative team to use sonar equipment and drones to survey the water area at coordinates 34.062 N, 81.351 W, within a 150-foot radius, for a 48-hour period from commencement. No one was permitted to dive underwater or approach the shore inside the Dominion fence line. When Keyes held the warrant in his hands, he looked at Maggie and smiled faintly. "We have 48 hours to find the truth." Maggie nodded, tears streaming down. 36 years of waiting, and finally, they had the right to look into the lake's depths, where she had always believed Caroline lay. The very next morning, the Tidewater team began preparations. The sonar equipment was checked one last time, drones test flown, batteries fully charged. They divided the survey area into small square grids to optimize time. Evan was in charge of operating the sonar. Keyes oversaw data and sled communications, and Maggie, though not allowed to participate directly, still stood on the shore watching. As the truck carrying the equipment pulled away from the dock, a gray sky blanketed in clouds signaled the season's first rain. A cold wind from the lake carried the scent of damp earth. Maggie watched the convoy go, her heart heavy. She knew the next 48 hours could change everything, or bring nothing. But either way, she had gone further than anyone had ever dared in the journey to find Caroline again. That afternoon, Keyes sent a brief email to SLED, warrant approved. Operation Tidewater, Murray begins at dawn. Under his signature, he added a short line, like a silent vow, no one stays buried under the water forever. They had exactly 48 hours to touch the secret buried for nearly 40 years. And this time, nothing could stop them from seeing what lay deep in Lake Murray's heart. Early morning on July 1, 2024, Lake Murray was covered in a thin layer of mist. The SLED Cold Case Division's temporary command post was set up right at the western boat dock of Somerset Estates. Under the sign Operation Tidewater, Murray, crates of sonar equipment, drones and surface cameras were lined up in rows. The Tidewater recovery team had exactly 48 hours per the court order to conduct the survey. Everyone understood this was the only chance to prove what they'd believed for months, that Caroline Mercer's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme was still lying at the bottom of the lake, where the old concrete road ended. Investigator Ronald Keyes reviewed the schedule again. They would scan 3 suspected areas first, including 2 small coves on the lake's north side, and 1 point about a mile from the Somerset area, before moving to the final focal point. "We'll start from the outside in," he said. "If they're all negative, we'll have nothing left to suspect." At 7 a.m., the first survey boat left the dock. Evan Brooks operated the side-scan sonar, towing a cylindrical transducer behind the stern that continuously emitted sound waves to both sides of the lake bed. The screen displayed bright lines and dark patches representing underwater structures. Maggie stood on the shore, wrapped in a thin windbreaker, following the boats. Each time she heard the radio crackle, her heart jumped. The first area was an old lake branch near Irmo Landing, where Caroline's bracelet had been found back in 1988. The depth was only about 20 feet, with relatively clear water. After more than an hour of scanning, the sonar showed only rocks, mud, and a few large tree branches. No notable metal reflections. Evan noted on the map, Area A, negative. The second area was near the main dam, where old rumors from fishermen mentioned seeing a submerged object. The team headed south, lowering a drone to record the water's surface while sonar scanned the bottom. Layers of sound waves appeared and faded, nothing but uneven mud patches. A rusted iron piece was pulled up but identified as part of an industrial water pipe. Result negative. By noon the sun grew harsh, the lake's surface reflecting blinding silver light. Evan wiped sweat from his brow, turning to Keyes. "We've lost half the day, and seen nothing. Both points are empty." Keyes replied curtly, "One more point. Keep the pace." He knew the team was starting to tire. The time pressure made everyone quiet, leaving only the boat's engine hum and the steady ping of the sonar. The third area, marked B, was on the lake's west side, near the old Santee Cooper construction dock. This was the deepest of the 3 points, with a muddy bottom and weak subsurface currents. Evan adjusted the sonar frequency lower to penetrate deeper into the sediment layers. The screen showed rippling black patches. At first everyone thought they were rocks, but then a faint curved outline appeared. The whole team held their breath. "Wait," Evan said, zooming in on the image. That curve only extended about 5 feet, too small for a car's size. When Keyes compared it to the map, they identified it as the frame of an old auxiliary iron bridge, dumped into the lake during 1991 repairs. Another false positive. Evan tapped the keyboard lightly, noting Area B, false return industrial metal. Late afternoon, the sun dipped low, casting an orange glow. Maggie sat on a small boat, silently watching Keyes review the data. All 3 scanned areas had come back negative. Faces were tense. They had less than 20 hours left on the warrant, and only one area unscanned, where the old concrete construction road led straight into the water, right at the spot where sonar had once picked up the strongest metal signal. Keyes looked around, his voice calm but heavy. "This is the last point. If there's nothing there, we'll have to close it." Evan nodded, rechecking the equipment. "We'll know soon enough." The team decided on a short break, before starting the final scan at dawn the next day, when the lake was calm, and the light soft, ideal for capturing sonar signals. Night fell, the command post lit up. Keyes sat reviewing the collected data, while Maggie brewed coffee for everyone. No one spoke of failure, but the air was leaden. She looked out the window at Lake Murray stretching black and vast, reflecting the moonlight. In her mind, she heard her mother's words from 1990. "The girl's still there, we just don't know where yet." That saying reignited a small flame in her heart. Around midnight, Keyes stepped outside. He stood beside Maggie, gazing at the still water. "Have you ever thought we might be wrong, that Caroline isn't here?" Maggie shook her head, her eyes fixed on the lake. "I don't know. But this is the only place left. If she's not here, I need to hear that too, to move on." Keyes nodded faintly. He understood she wasn't just seeking answers, she was seeking a way to end a lifelong obsession. The next morning, as the first rays hit the lake, the Tidewater team was ready. The sonar was lowered precisely into the final position. The deep water area that had once been the Santee Cooper Construction's concrete road segment. All eyes glued to the computer screen as the sound waves began scanning the depths. Evan whispered over the mic, "Final scan beginning. Somerset coordinates sector." No one spoke. The entire command post was dead silent, only the steady beep from the sonar echoing through the misty space, signaling they were inching toward the answer hidden under Lake Murray's waters for 36 years. Early morning on July 2, 2024, thick fog blanketed Lake Murray. The Tidewater Recovery Team and Seld Cold Case Division Unit were on site from dawn, preparing for the final scan within the 48-hour limit. This coordinate point lay right below Somerset Estates, where the Santee Cooper construction site had once been. If nothing turned up today, the Caroline Mercer case would sink back into oblivion. Evan Brooks powered up the side-scan sonar. Sound waves spread down to the lakebed, lighting up the screen with bright and dark bands like a heartbeat. Ronald Keyes stood by, monitoring the data. 10 minutes passed, showing only mud and rocks. At the 13th minute, a strong echo bounced back, a clear blocky reflection, a large metal object, nearly 5 meters long, tilted to one side. The boat's cabin went silent. Evan slowed the scan speed, the screen displaying 4 bright spots at the rear, positions matching car taillights. He turned to Keyes, voice trembling. "We have something." Keyes ordered the sonar halted, and switched to ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. The cable was lowered, the camera feeding live video to the screen. In the murky water, the white light swept over patches of algae. A glint of metal appeared, covered in green moss. As the ROV angled, 2 red circles reflected the light, car taillights. Evan murmured, "That's the car." Keyes stared, his voice dropping low, "Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme." Caroline Mercer. On shore, Maggie stood near the command post, hearing the news over the radio. She didn't cry, just gazed at the mirror-still lake surface, her hand clenching the silver bracelet. After 36 years, something real had finally returned. Keys reported immediately to SLED and the Lexington County Sheriff's Department. Within an hour, the area was cordoned off. Police strung yellow tape around the boat dock, blocking reporters and the curious. 2 forensic technicians boarded the boat with keys to document the scene. The ROV continued close-ups, the car's body caked in mud, the front bumper crushed, evidence of a hard impact on impact. A corner of the license plate emerged, faded but readable with the last 3 characters, 912. When Maggie heard the numbers, she only whispered, "That's it. CXM, 912. By midday, a salvage team from Charleston arrived. They brought a floating crane and heavy-duty cables. Before diving, technicians confirmed the depth at over 40 feet, with weak currents. 2 divers descended, groping around the car's frame to secure the lines. They spent nearly an hour in the dark water. Each bubble surfacing made everyone on shore hold their breath. Finally, the radio crackled, lines secured, ready to lift. The crane's engine roared. The steel cable tightened, the water foaming. Black mud churned up like smoke. A silver metal edge broke the surface, sunlight glinting off it. The crowd beyond the barriers fell silent. Inch by inch, the Oldsmobile emerged from the water, roof moss-covered, windows shattered, rear wheels, mud-caked. Water poured from the interior, carrying the scent of mud and metal. The car was placed on the grassy bank beside the lake, covered with a blue tarp. Maggie approached, her eyes locked on the familiar shape. Police held her back outside the tape line, but she just stared silently, her hand trembling around the silver bracelet. Without a word from anyone, she knew her sister had been found. Keys and the forensics team got to work. They photographed, videotaped, sealed off every section. An officer opened the right side door, murky water spilled out, dragging small items, a leather wallet, a faded denim scrap, and a broken chain. Inside the cabin, the light revealed human arm bones wedged under the steering wheel. Keys closed his notebook, voice deeply somber, victim identified. "This is Caroline Mercer." The information was kept confidential, but news still leaked. Reporters filmed from afar, while police erected barriers around the dock. As dusk fell, red sunlight spread across the lake, like a faint bloodstain. The tarp-covered car sat still, surrounded by fluttering police tape in the breeze. Maggie stood there for a long time, saying nothing. As everyone left the scene, Keys stayed with her. He placed a hand on the shoulder of the woman, who had spent half her life seeking answers. Maggie nodded faintly, voice choked. 36 years, finally, she's coming home. Keys looked out at the darkening lake, replying softly, "We heard it. The lake can't keep secrets forever." Night fell, police lights reflecting on the water. A long chapter closed. Caroline Mercer, the girl missing since 1988, had finally been found. But for Keys, he knew this was just the beginning. As the lights faded, old questions resurfaced with the water. How did Caroline end up in the lake, and who made sure she never came back? The next morning, Lake Murray's surface was still murky after the night salvage operation. The SLED technical team set up additional barriers, specialized vehicles carrying forensic equipment parked in a row along the shore. In the middle of the cordoned area, the silver Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, now just a moss-dulled metal mass, lay on a large tarp, water still dripping from the undercarriage. The letters CXM, 912 on the rear license plate, though faded, were still visible. On the hood, thick layers of moss and dried mud covered it, traces of 36 years of burial. Investigator Ronald Keys and the forensics team continued the excavation work. They set up a temporary preservation tent to shield from the sun and avoid reporters' lenses. Every detail was documented, photographed, and marked. The technician opened the driver's side door, stagnant water and mud spilled out, carrying a musty odor. Inside, the seat frames were torn, the dashboard corroded, but on the passenger seat, they discovered a small leather wallet, a cassette tape, and a keychain with a silver star fob. All were placed into sealed evidence bags. Keyes squatted by the car's side, staring at the keychain in the clear plastic bag, his eyes darkening. "This fob," he murmured, "is exactly as Maggie described in her 1988 statement." A technician nodded, voice low, and the leather wallet engraved with CM. The initials faded, but still discernible. The rear door was jammed, forcing the forensics team to use tools to pry it open. Inside the trunk, they found female remains, a nearly intact skeleton, covered in a thick layer of mud. A thin silver ring still clung to her left ring finger, and a broken necklace chain was caught between the cervical bones. The space fell completely silent. One forensics technician stood motionless for a long moment before whispering, "She never left this place." Maggie was invited in to identify the evidence. She stepped into the tented area, the smell of metal and damp mud making her pause. When Keyes held up the plastic bag with the keychain, she immediately reached out to touch it, tears welling up. "That's it, the silver star fob. My sister carried it since high school," she said, her voice trembling. When she saw the wallet, she nodded, unable to speak further. Everyone in the tent fell silent. Keyes gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Caroline's come home, Maggie." That afternoon, the body was transported to the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division's Forensic Center in Columbia for DNA analysis and determination of cause of death. Before the transport vehicle departed, Maggie stood watching, her hands clasped together, as if afraid that letting go would mean losing her sister all over again. A cold wind from the lake carried humidity and the scent of motor oil. As the forensics team left the scene, Keyes stayed behind with the sled crew to pack up. They found one more small item, a cassette tape still in the car's player, its label handwritten, Fleetwood Mac, Dreams. Keyes carefully packaged it, adding it to the other evidence. To him it wasn't just proof, it was a trace of a young woman who had once existed, who had listened to music on her way home, before vanishing. That evening, the forensics lab sent a preliminary report. The DNA matched the hair sample profile of Caroline Mercer from the original 1988 file. Official confirmation, victim identified. Initial findings showed signs of a broken neck bone before the car entered the water, a detail that made Keyes realize this was no longer an accident. He immediately drafted a report to the State Attorney General's office, recommending the case be elevated to a criminal homicide investigation. The next morning, a brief press conference was held at the Lexington County Sheriff's Office. Keyes stood before the row of reporters, voice steady. "Yesterday, we recovered Caroline Mercer's vehicle, missing since 1988. Inside were female remains and related evidence. The case has been officially reopened as a homicide." Camera shutters clicked furiously. He offered no details on suspects, only emphasizing that we're working with the forensics lab to clarify the cause of death. News spread quickly across South Carolina. On evening broadcasts, images of the tarp-covered Oldsmobile by Lake Murray appeared with the chyron, "Cold case after 36 years, Caroline Mercer found." Hundreds tuned in, many who had lived around the lake in 1988, called stations, sharing old memories, saying they'd heard rumors of the missing girl but never imagined the truth lay underwater. That night, Maggie returned to the lake. The area was still cordoned off, but she was allowed to stand at the edge of the lot where the car had been pulled up. Moonlight reflected on the water, gentle waves lapping the shore. She whispered, almost inaudibly, "You don't have to wait anymore." Beside her, Keyes stood silent, notebook in hand. In it he had written the first line of a new chapter, Caroline Mercer case reopened, charge first-degree murder. He knew the days ahead would be a long and grueling investigation, but at least, the mystery was no longer hidden beneath the lake's surface. Caroline had finally been seen, and justice, though late, had begun to stir. At the South Carolina State Forensic Center in Columbia, the examination team began processing the skeletal remains found in the Oldsmobile. Under the cold white lights, forensic pathologist Dr. Lila Grant carefully cleaned each bone fragment, noting every injury in detail. Preliminary results showed a clear fracture in the C2 vertebra of the neck, typical of direct blunt force trauma, occurring before the body contacted the water. A small crack on the back of the skull was present, not fatal on its own, but consistent with impact from a hard object. She was attacked or shoved hard before the car sank, Dr. Grant said, her voice hoarse after hours of work. Other samples were sent for chemical analysis. Scrape marks on the car's roof showed a light gray-white paint, characteristic of industrial concrete mix. Under fluorescence microscopy, the results matched materials from Santee Cooper Construction in 1988, archived in the state's old database. This proved the car had collided with equipment or structures at the construction site before plunging into the lake. The evidence obliterated any natural accident theories. Investigator Ronald Keyes received the report in early August 2024. He read every line carefully, then folded it shut, eyes thoughtful. The final puzzle piece was coming into focus. Caroline had been attacked on the night she disappeared, possibly at the construction site, where only those with access would know the layout. He decided to reopen Santee Cooper's personnel files, the company that had built the area. After 3 decades, the records had been archived in state storage, but with SLED's help, Keyes quickly accessed the night shift roster for May 4th into the early hours of May 5, 1988. When the list appeared, his eyes locked on the name Dean Walker, night shift concrete pour supervisor. Beside it was a confirming signature. The ink was faded, but clear enough to be undeniable. Keyes felt his chest tighten. All the leads over the years pointed to one man, Dean, Caroline's ex-boyfriend, who had claimed to leave the bar early and never see her again that night. Now the records proved he was right there, right then. With the forensics lab, Keyes organized a crime scene reconstruction at Lake Murray. The old construction site, now the Somerset Estates development, was partially cordoned off for the investigation. 1988 blueprints were spread on the table. According to them, a temporary concrete ramp leading to the lake had been poured fresh on the night of May 4th, just before Caroline vanished. Engineers from that era were brought in to verify positions. One, Alan Pierce, upon seeing photos, recalled that night had light rain. The ramp was just finished, no barriers up yet. Only crew members knew it led straight to the lake. Keyes had a 3D model built from satellite images, sonar data, and terrain specs. The result showed a slope steeper than 25 degrees, enough for a car to slide into the water if nudged. He replayed scene data. The front of Caroline's car had impact marks from a hard object, aligning with the concrete ramp. The heavy blow before submersion explained the dented roof and clinging cement paint. Someone deliberately pushed the car after the victim could no longer resist, Keyes concluded. Maggie was invited to witness the reconstruction briefing. As she watched the simulation, she stayed silent for a long time. The image showed the car sliding off the ramp, plunging into the lake, amid the foggy rain and dim lights. Everyone in the room felt an unspoken heaviness. Maggie whispered, "If that was her last night, at least now we know what happened." From the new evidence, Keyes formally requested elevation to criminal investigation, naming Dean Walker as the primary suspect. He submitted to SLED the full proof, bone analysis showing neck trauma before submersion, cement paint matching site materials, and personnel records placing Dean at the scene. Forensics concluded clearly, death by external force before the car entered the water. News of the findings spread fast. TV headlines blared. Caroline Mercer did not die in accident. 1988, suspect emerges. The Lake Murray community was shaken. Many recalled Dean Walker, who had left South Carolina long ago, and was known to live quietly in Georgia. Now that name returned, tied to a murder case after over 3 decades. At day's end, leaving the forensics lab, Keyes paused in the empty hallway, gazing at Caroline's photo on the bulletin board. He murmured to himself, "We've heard you now, Caroline. Your story is finally being told." Outside, dusk settled over the city, golden sunlight slanting across the lab's roof, signaling a new phase of the case was about to unfold. where the truth would no longer be buried in mud and water. On the morning of August 14, 2024, the quiet street in Augusta, Georgia, was still damp with early dew. In front of the brick house at 2417 Peachtree Drive, 4 SLED and GBI police vehicles pulled up silently. As the front door opened, Dean Walker, 63, in his pajamas, hadn't grasped what was happening when 2 officers approached. The lead one read aloud, "Mr. Dean Walker, by order of the Lexington County Court, you are under arrest for first-degree murder in connection with the death of Caroline Mercer in 1988. Dean froze. The coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the tile floor. He didn't resist, just bowed his head as handcuffs clicked on. Eyes glazed, Dean stared out at the peaceful street where he'd lived more than 20 years as an ordinary neighbor. As the car pulled away, he muttered, almost to himself, "I didn't mean to." At the GBI Augusta holding station, investigator Ronald Keyes conducted the interrogation personally. On the table, he placed a photo of the salvaged Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, its body moss-covered, faded plate, CXM 912. Dean stared at it for a long moment, fingers trembling. "Do you remember this car?" Keyes asked. "Caroline's," Dean replied softly. "And on the night of May 4, 1988, you were at the Santee Cooper site." Dean sighed. "Yes. Night shift. Forensic evidence matches the site's materials and your personnel records perfectly. Care to explain?" Dean was silent for a long time before starting to recount. "We argued at the bar. She got mad, stormed off. I followed, wanted to talk. When I got there, she'd stopped her car at the site. It was raining. She was furious, said she'd call the cops because I'd stolen materials. I grabbed her arm. She slipped, fell, hit her head on the car door. I thought she was dead. I panicked, didn't know what to do. I drove her car down the concrete ramp. I just wanted to hide it." His voice shook. "I didn't mean to kill her." Keyes looked him dead in the eye. "You left her under that lake for 36 years, while a family searched for half a lifetime." Dean bowed his head, pleading, "I was wrong. I haven't had a peaceful night's sleep since." The statement lasted 3 hours. Dean signed off on every detail. That afternoon, he was transferred to the Lexington County Detention Center in South Carolina. The press was waiting. As the prisoner transport passed, dozens of flashes popped. The evening news ticker read, "Arrest in Caroline Mercer case. Dean Walker, 63, in custody." At SLED headquarters, Keyes reviewed the file again. All evidence aligned. Neck trauma before submersion, concrete paint, matching the site, Dean present at the scene. The report concluded, victim died from external force. Perpetrator intentionally concealed the body and pushed the vehicle into the water. That evening, Keyes called Maggie Mercer. There was a long silence on the line before she said, "I don't know what I feel. I just know my sister finally has justice." When asked if she wanted to see Dean, she shook her head. "No, I don't need to hear anything from him. Just knowing my sister isn't in the dark anymore." The next day, Dean was brought to Lexington County Court for preliminary arraignment. He kept his head down as the prosecutor read the charges: first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Dean acknowledged the statement, but claimed involuntary manslaughter. The judge denied bail, citing the case's severe dangerous elements. As the gavel fell, the room went quiet. Outside, locals gathered at the courthouse. Many who knew Dean in Augusta were stunned seeing his image on TV. One woman said, "He fixed my fence once. I can't believe it." But for Maggie, behind the police barricade, there was only calm. She whispered, "My sister wasn't forgotten." That night, in his empty office, Keyes wrote the final line in his notebook. Dean Walker arrested. Confession matches evidence. Caroline Mercer case closes the dark chapter. He shut the book, gazing out the window at the fine rain falling. Just like the night in 1988, the night a young woman was swallowed by the lake's surface, and now, justice had finally risen with the light. Spring 2025, the Lexington County Courthouse in South Carolina was packed. After nearly 40 years since the night Caroline Mercer disappeared, the case finally entered its official trial. In front of the courtroom, dozens of local TV reporters set up cameras, the ticker on the morning news broadcasts reading, "The Caroline Mercer Case, Justice After 36 Years." In courtroom number 3, the atmosphere was heavy. In the front row, Maggie Mercer sat between two of her grandchildren, her hands clutching her mother's old Bible tightly. On the other side, Dean Walker, 63 years old, appeared in an orange prison jumpsuit, gaunt and with snow-white hair. He bowed his head as he was led in, not daring to look toward the Mercer family. Behind them, local residents, those who had lived around Lake Murray in 1988, filled the spectator seats. South Carolina State Prosecutor Janice Calloway stood up to open, "Your Honor, this is not an accident. This is murder, covered up for 36 years. Caroline Mercer, 22 years old, was beaten, pushed, and left at the bottom of Lake Murray. We have scientific evidence, witnesses, and a confession." Her voice was firm, echoing in the silent room, where the scratching of reporters' pens could be clearly heard. The defense attorney, Michael Rayburn, court-appointed for Dean, immediately objected. "My client is not a murderer. He was a young man in panic, making a mistake but with no intent to kill anyone. The incident was an accident, not a deliberate crime." The trial lasted 10 days. The prosecution presented physical and forensic evidence one by one. First was the bone examination report, injury to the C2 cervical vertebra, occurring before the body made contact with water. Calloway clarified, "This proves Caroline was attacked before the car plunged into the lake." Next was the analysis of concrete paint scrapings on the car roof, matching exactly the material from the 1988 Santee Cooper construction site, where Dean worked the night shift as supervisor. On the screen, a 3D reconstruction of the scene was displayed, the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme careening down the sloped concrete road at a 25-degree angle, crashing into the water. The simulation showed that without a push or heavy throttle, the car couldn't have slid down on its own. The simulation engineers concluded, this could not have been a natural accident. The jury, consisting of 7 women and 5 men, watched intently. They heard the recording of Dean's statement from August 2024, his voice choked. "I didn't mean to kill her, I was just scared." Prosecutor Calloway turned back to the jury, speaking slowly. "He didn't mean to kill, but he hit, he pushed, and he let her die without ever seeking help. The law calls that first-degree murder, or at least voluntary manslaughter." The defense focused on the unintentional element. They called Dean to the stand. He stood there, hunched over, voice feeble. "I was wrong. I panicked. I was young and stupid. I didn't know if she was still breathing. I just wanted to hide the argument." When the lawyer asked if he intended to harm Caroline, Dean shook his head. "No, I loved her." Attorney Rayburn argued, "There is no evidence that Dean planned a murder, no weapon, no prior intent. The incident occurred in an emotional conflict. It was a tragic accident, not a crime." However, the prosecution quickly countered. They called Dr. Lila Grant, a forensic expert, as a witness. She pointed to the cervical bone X-ray and said, "This injury could not result from a light fall. It requires twisting force, or a strong blow. A person falling naturally would fracture the lower neck, but here, the break is at C2, a sign of direct impact." The entire room fell silent. Next, the prosecution displayed photos of the wallet, the star-shaped keychain, and the cassette tape found in the car. They emphasized, he had time to take items, cover up the car and leave. That was not an unconscious reaction. A technician presented a map of Dean's route, leaving South Carolina, just 2 weeks after the disappearance, taking a job in Georgia, under a different company name. He fled, rather than grieved. On the 8th day, the trial reached its climax when the prosecution played the salvage footage. Everyone held their breath as, on the screen, the silver car emerged from the water, covered in moss and with blurred red taillights. Maggie shed tears. The sight made many spectators wipe their eyes too. When the video ended, the prosecutor said just one sentence, "Caroline Mercer has been there for 36 years because of him." The defense tried to regain ground with a humane closing. A man who has lived half his life in regret, now standing before you, is not a cold-blooded killer, but a man who has paid the price. Judge with compassion. But the prosecution closed powerfully. Regret doesn't erase the crime. He let her die alone, buried the truth, and lived peacefully for 36 years. If that's not a crime, what does this justice mean? On the afternoon of April 22, 2025, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning. The foreman read the verdict. The defendant Dean Walker is guilty of first-degree manslaughter. In the courtroom, a few murmurs, then silence. Dean bowed his head, hands trembling as he gripped the chair. Maggie clutched her granddaughter's hand, tears streaming but lips pressed tight. Judge Harold Layton sentenced, for the charge of first-degree manslaughter and intentional concealment of evidence. Defendant Dean Walker is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The gavel's bang echoed through the room. Dean lifted his head, looking around, eyes brimming. "I'm sorry, I deserve this." Maggie stood up, not looking at him, whispering softly, "It's finally over, Caroline." Her words silenced the entire courtroom. As police led Dean from the courthouse, the crowd outside burst into tears and applause, not out of joy, but relief. On the evening news, images of Maggie hugging her sister's photo amid the crowd aired across the state. Below the headline, "Justice for Caroline Mercer, after 36 years, the lake finally spoke." In a brief press conference afterward, Keyes told reporters, "This isn't a victory, it's a reminder that no secret stays underwater forever. Every cold case is a story waiting to be heard." That evening, Maggie returned to Lake Murray. The water was still, moonlight reflecting on the small waves. She placed a bouquet of white flowers on the shore, whispering softly, "You're at peace now." In the distance, the lights of Somerset Estates cast down on the lake, where secrets had been hidden for nearly 40 years. Now the lake had given back everything, the truth, justice, and a bit of peace for those left behind. The life sentence for Dean Walker closed the Caroline Mercer case, but its aftershocks rippled across South Carolina. Residents around Lake Murray were stunned to learn the killer was the man they had respected, a retired engineer, youth football coach, their friendly neighbor for years. "He still smiled and greeted me every morning," a woman from Augusta told the TV station. "I can't believe someone like that ever killed anyone." Statewide newspapers ran front-page stories, "Justice after 36 years, the Caroline Mercer case." Images of the salvaged Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme dominated evening broadcasts. Forensic experts and crime investigators were invited to analyze, calling it a milestone in cold case investigations using modern technology. Side-scan sonar, satellite imagery, and archival data, combined with Seled's persistence, became a textbook example of justice never dies. In Columbia, residents raised funds to establish the Mercer Initiative, a foundation supporting civilian search team training and criminology research. Universities across the state used Caroline's case as an example in forensic investigation courses. "This is the case that proves technology only matters when paired with patience," a professor said on CNN. 2 weeks after the verdict, a memorial for Caroline Mercer was held at Lake Murray, at Irmo Landing, where her silver bracelet had been found. Over 200 attended, including the Tidewater team and investigator Ronald Keyes. Maggie stood on the wooden podium, holding a bouquet of white flowers. Her voice choked. 36 years ago, this lake swallowed my sister. Today it gives us back faith in justice." As the flowers were released, hundreds of white petals floated sparkling on the water, like a belated farewell. Behind her, Keyes stood silently, hat in hand. For him, the Caroline case was not just a professional success, but a lesson in perseverance. Afterward, Seled officially incorporated the case into a training program called Deep Water Forensics for young investigators. In the classroom, new officers reviewed real sonar data, 1988, 2024 satellite images, and the Somerset Estates construction model. Keyes said, "We don't just learn how to find cars underwater, we learn how to listen to the past." National media quickly took notice. Dateline, NBC and CNN aired specials on Cold Case Lake Murray, interviewing Maggie and the Tidewater team. Maggie appeared simply, with silver hair and a calm voice. "I don't hate Dean, I just regret he didn't speak sooner. If he'd confessed, my mother wouldn't have carried that question to her grave." Her words were quoted everywhere, becoming a symbol of forgiveness and belated truth. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForCaroline Mercer spread, accompanied by images of Lake Murray at dawn. People from everywhere sent letters sharing stories, many who had lost loved ones in cold cases, reaching out to Maggie with their own tales. A local paper wrote, "Lake Murray was once a place of silence. Now it reminds us that justice can still echo from the shadows." For lakefront residents, the case changed how they viewed their home. The town opened an exhibit, Lake Murray, Then and Now, displaying salvage photos, construction maps, and Caroline's silver bracelet. Every May, residents lit candles around the lake, remembering her and other missing persons. By the end of summer 2025, Maggie wrote an op-ed for the State. "Lake Murray is no longer a scary place. It's where it holds my sister's memory and reminds us that truth always rises." The piece was shared across platforms. At Celad's year-end ceremony, Keyes spoke briefly to new officers. "Justice may come late, but that doesn't make it weak. The Caroline Mercer case proves time can hide traces, but it can't hide the truth." In the late afternoon, Lake Murray lay flat and calm, ripples reflecting the sunset. Residents still came, placing white flowers on the shore where the old construction site once stood, and as the wind blew, the petals swayed gently, like the whisper of a young woman, finally at rest, her story living on in this community's memory. Fall 2025 brought a gentle coolness to Lake Murray. Red maples reflected on the water, evoking the memorial ceremony a few months earlier. In her small Columbia home, Maggie Mercer sat by the window, slowly turning the pages of the manuscript she'd just finished, her memoir, Beneath the Surface, a 36-year journey for justice for Caroline. She wrote not to recount a case, but to record the journey of faith, the belief that no matter how long, truth would find its way back. In the opening pages, Maggie described the night in 1988, rain pattering on the window, the call to police, and the emptiness of stepping into her sister's vacant apartment. The years that followed, she portrayed as an endless journey, writing letters to police, chasing leads, sending files to search groups, then watching it all fade into time's silence. "I lived 30 years with only two things, memories and hope," she wrote. The middle section was devoted to the fateful meeting with the Tidewater recovery team and investigator Ronald Keyes. She remembered clearly the day they sat in her living room, poring over yellowed old files. "When they said they'd try again, I didn't dare believe," she wrote, but there was something in their voices more certain than faith. The search for the Oldsmobile at the lake bottom was recreated in detail, interwoven with emotions. The tense hours when sonar pinged metal, then the moment the car shimmered up from the black water. Maggie recounted it as the instant time seemed to stop, when all the pain, doubt, and waiting merged into the wind over the lake. After the trial, life quieted. Dean Walker was imprisoned at Greenwood, not appealing. Maggie said she no longer harbored resentment, only regret for two lives buried together, one in water, one in lies. "Justice can't bring my sister back, but at least it lets her rest in peace." The Tidewater team stayed in South Carolina a few more weeks after the trial to assist CELAD training, then left on a foggy morning. Maggie saw them off at the dock. Evan shook her hand, saying, "If there's another place that needs us, just say. No case is too old, if someone still wants the truth." She just smiled. "Thank you for finding my sister and my faith." As their boat pulled away, the lake mirrored the pale pink sky, a light breeze rippling the water like a goodbye. In the final months of the year, Maggie returned to the lake weekly. She sat on a small wooden chair, carrying the unpublished memoir, rereading the closing lines. "Justice doesn't come in bright lights, but in silence, like when the flat lake returns what it once held." Each reading brought her more peace. One afternoon, Keyes stopped by, bringing a drone photo from the salvage day, the silver car just emerging from the water, surrounded by sparkling sunlight. He said, "I thought you should have it. This is the moment," Lake Murray answered. Maggie framed the photo in wood, placing it beside Caroline's portrait. She smiled. "I'll never forget." When the memoir was published, the cover showed the calm lake at dawn, with a small quote below in her words, "Truth never sinks, it only waits to be found." The book quickly inspired families, searching for missing loved ones. They wrote to her, saying Caroline's story gave them faith to keep going. Finally, Maggie ended with, "I no longer stand waiting by the lake's edge. I know she's free, and truth, like light, always finds a way through water, no matter the years." One early winter morning, Lake Murray was as quiet as a giant mirror. Sunlight pierced the thin mist, reflecting on the silvery water. No more machinery, no yellow tape, just gentle wind, soft waves lapping the shore, and white flowers drifting aimlessly. There the Caroline Mercer story closed, leaving a silent but enduring legacy, that justice may come late, but truth never sinks, it only waits to be found. The Caroline Mercer story reflects America. Technology only works when someone persists. Maggie endured, Tidewater partnered with Selad, the Lake Murray community united, and data became justice. Lesson 1. Don't rush to label runaway. The case was once deemed an accident, only when side-scan sonar, ROV, and satellite images matched the Somerset Estates maps did truth surface. Families with missing loved ones build a timeline, keep small evidence, persistently ask for updates. Lesson 2. Legal barriers can be overcome. Dominion Energy refused. Selad obtained a limited search warrant, adhering to safety. When needing records, use FOIA, prepare documents, find allies, take steps one by one. Lesson 3. Technology needs community ethics. Sonar and ROV matter when people like Maggie step up, when society honors victims, establishing the Mercer Initiative, incorporating the case into deep water forensics, training to prevent repeats. Finally, personal safety. Caroline vanished after a late-night argument. Reality reminds us to plan getting home, share locations, use safe text codes, recognize relationship violence, and seek help early. If a witness, like the Amoco station attendant, report immediately. Small details like a star-shaped keychain hold value. When communities document well, collaborate persistently, use technology, and respect legality, late justice arrives sooner. Truth never sinks. Sometimes it just waits for those willing to dive deep to find it. Thank you for joining the journey to uncover the truth beneath Lake Murray, where justice arrives late, but never fades. Please subscribe to the channel to keep following cold cases brought to light, and see you in the next video.